Welcome to Chapter 3, Personality and Perceptions. I absolutely love this photograph, the picture of the small little cat there, and then the shadow showing the huge line in the background. Um, because personality shapes so much of how we kind of show up in the world and how we operate and what we achieve and what we pursue. And often you can't really judge people from the outside, from the external picture, because they could have a great foundation in their education and what they've built internally. And I just love this picture for that reason. Okay, so by the time you finish going through this chapter, you should have learned the importance of individual differences, the relationship between personality and behavior, how personality is assessed in organizations, the importance of social perception, how biases create barriers to social perception, and the mechanism of impression management. This is a cool little formula, and it tries to explain the differences between individuals and all the components that make up your personality. And so the textbook argues that the first characteristic or component of your personality is your ability and your skills, both cognitive skills, technical skills, and your interpersonal skills. Then there's something called the G factor, and that's an individual's mental ability, kind of their natural capacity. IQ scores are commonly regarded as an estimate of the G factor. So, how intelligent are people? Perception is the next component, and that is your mood, values, attitudes, and your cognitive structure. Um, Kind of how do you perceive the world, right? How do you show up? And depending on your culture and your upbringing, you may perceive a situation entirely different than somebody else. And attribution is the last point, and it explains how we pinpoint the causes of our own behavior and other people's behavior. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in this chapter. But just know for now there's an internal and external component. If you add all of those things up, that equals your personality. So, explaining how personality influences behavior. And so they have a nice diagram here. It's very clear, easy to follow. You have personality characteristics and situational characteristics, and all of those things influence your behavior. And personality characteristics are things like skills and abilities, your perception, your attributes, your attitudes, your values, some of the things we talked about in the first slide. And then the second piece is your situational characteristics, right? What is your physical environment, your social setting, where are you working, what's your personal life like? And both of these components influence not only each other, but your behavior. As you can see, it's a triangular model, and each of those variables kind of influence the other ones. Okay, 5 personality trait model. This is explaining how your personality and behavior is kind of shaped. And these are a continuum, right? It is not like someone is 100% extroverted and another person is 100% introverted. It is a continuum. So most people are predominantly extroverted or they're predominantly introverted, but you could be a little bit of both. It doesn't necessarily mean you're one on one end or the other. And these are the big 5 personality traits. And this is normally how your personality is attributed. So agreeableness is the next one, and that's how cooperative and warm and agreeable a person is. So if you're very agreeable, you're very warm, you're very cooperative, you're easy to get along with, and if you're disagreeable, you're on the other end of that spectrum. Conscientiousness. This is a person hardworking? Are they organized? Are they dependable? And on the other end, they're disorganized. Some people might say lazy, maybe unreliable. The next one is uh, so neuroticism is the next one is, and if you are very neurotic, you're often insecure, anxious, and depressed, as opposed to the other end of the spectrum, and that is you're emotionally stable, meaning you're generally calm and self confident and cool. The last of the big five personality traits is openness to experience versus cautious. If you are open to experience, you're more often to be open to new adventures and new experiences and kind of going out there and learning things. And if you're cautious and closed minded, you're a lot more reserved. So take a look at these five personality traits and try to figure out where you fit on these continuums. Okay, models of personality explaining how your personality is shaped. Um, you could be neurotic or selflessness. That's the first one. Either you're self-absorbed and you spend a lot of time thinking about yourself and kind of caught up in your ego, or maybe you're selflessness, and that is you spend more time um, thinking about other people and contributing maybe to your community or your family. Um, Psychopathy describes the degree to which someone cares about others. So people who have a high level of psychopathy do not care about others at all. And if you go to the other end of the spectrum, empathy, then you are more likely to think about others and take um, you know, their views and their feelings into account when you act and work with them and kind of show up in the world. Machiavellianism is it corresponds to the degree of morality that a person has. So if you're very Machiavellian, you don't have very many values. You're more likely to manipulate people, exploit people, and people may consider you amoral, right? You're only interested in yourself and personal gain. And scrupulous is the opposite end of the spectrum, right? So I'm hoping when you look at the dark triad, you're more towards the left side of the spectrum on these traits because that will make life a lot easier on your end. The hex code trait model is another level of continuum kind of, it incorporates the dark triad and the big five to create a very robust model of personality traits. So we went through all of these individually, and you can see kind of where you fit on this spectrum. We are going to go into much more detail about these models, but of course we will spend time going through the personality tests in this course. Which first? Oh yeah, the type focus. I don't know, for some reason I was drawing a blank there. We'll be going through the type focus models in this course, and you'll learn a little bit about your personality, which has similar components to these models, just maybe a little bit of different language. Okay, other personality traits, core self-evaluation is locus of control, self-esteem, self-efficacy. And this means that if you feel like you have a strong locus of control and self-esteem and self-efficacy, that means that you have a lot of control over your life and that what you want to achieve is up to you. And if you achieve it, then you'll get the credit. But if you don't, then you will accept a failure, and that basically your life is not controlled by the external factors. Of course, external factors will influence your behavior, but ultimately where you end up in life is up to you. Self-monitors, so we have high self-monitors versus low self-monitors. And self-monitoring is the extent to which people base their behavior on cues from other people and situations. So if you're a high self-monitor, you pay attention to what is appropriate in each situation, gauged by other people's behavior. And if you're a low self-monitor, you pay little attention to situational cues from other people. So it's kind of personable, not personable, right? Like if you're very personable, you get along with other people, you pick up subtle cues, you can read them and behave accordingly. And if you're not very personable, you struggle in that area. Affect refers to an individual's general outlook. Do you have a positive outlook, or do you have a negative outlook? Are you optimistic or are you pessimistic? And again, these are all continuums, right? It doesn't mean that you're either a positive person or you're a negative person, but we've all met people that are overly negative, but negative most of the time. And in contrast, we also can think of, and we have met people that are overwhelmingly positive and just great to be around, right? No one wants to be around a negative person. It's depressing and makes life a lot less fun. So, personality assessment tools, like I said before, we're going to go through the type focus one in this class, but there's a number of tests out there, and you know, you can't take them too seriously. Like you can spend some time and do them, and hopefully you learn something about yourself. But don't feel like just because a test tells you you're a certain way that that is necessarily fixed, or that you have to govern your entire life based on a personality test. So the Myers-Briggs is a test that type focus is based on. So you'll see the extroversion, the sensing, the thinking, the judging, um, the intuition, the feeling, the perceiving. Hopefully, these become more recognizable to you once you've done the type focus, and you can kind of see how these models apply to your personality and your values and your beliefs, and how it may be beneficial. So yeah, why would you use it? Well, some of the pros of doing the type focus is that it's very widely accepted around the world. It's actually used in over 100 countries, and because of that, it's very reliable, and there's a lot of information there. And the kind of con to using some of these things is that sometimes they're a poor predictor of success, and in an organization or in your career, they aren't always a great way to predict what you're going to be able to achieve or what you're going to be able to do. But they use them for all sorts of things, right? Like self-development and team management and building. If people have conflicts at work, and certainly for educational and vocational counseling, that's something that if you're not sure what you're going to do once you're done at Georgian, is to jump into some of the recommendations from your results to see what are some potential careers that your personality is well suited for. Okay, so social perception. So, when it comes to interacting with other people, social perception is the process of interpreting information about another person or group. In other words, it's how we make sense of other people. And as human beings, we are naturally kind of motivated to understand other people, right? This is how we have come to dominate the world, is that we are great at cooperating. And we attempt to understand people through four components: through observation, attribution, integration, and confirmation. So, observation just includes all of the raw data that comes in, like everything you hear and see, and then you try to make a decision based kind of on your observation. So there's a lot of detail about this in your textbook. It's hard to explain in too much detail just by going through the slides. So I would encourage you to dig a bit more into the material of the texts, because this slide here just does not do it justice. And again, like I said, um, I don't want to go into too much detail here, because I would encourage you to really learn it and understand it by reading through the text. Okay, biases and barriers to acute perception. So all of us have opinions and beliefs, right? Like we all grow up in a certain culture. We are all educated a certain way, and we perceive the world based on those experiences. And this is something called the perceptual screen, or the frame of reference. Like you see everything through a frame of reference. Um, this goes through a couple of the biases, right? Like a Bayesian observation is selective perception. So maybe you accept some information and not others. We all know what stereotyping is, that we treat a whole group of people one way because one person has acted in a certain way. The halo effect is is something where you automatically think if someone's a police officer maybe or a doctor that they're doing something good because of their role. And observational bias is when you have a certain opinion and everything that you see is kind of skewed towards your viewpoint. There are literally hundreds of biases that affect every person. So you just have to be able to be aware that you have these biases, and that when you're in certain situations that you don't let your biases kind of dictate your decisions and dictate how you interact with people, because based on our upbringing, our schooling, and our culture, we all tend to lean one way or the other. Although we try to think of ourselves as being completely unbiased, unfortunately, it's just not true. Okay, impression management. Most of us want to be favorable, make a favorable impression on others, right? So, impressive management often has a negative connotation um, because people use impression management to kind of influence the way people think about us, right? And it has a negative perception because some people feel like if you're altering your personality to kind of come off as the ideal person, that may not be authentic. But we all do it in interviews, for example. Like when you show up to an interview, you might put on a certain professional personality or persona to try to, I don't know, influence the person sitting across on the table. So self disclosure involves conveying information about oneself and one's achievement to establish an identity. So self disclosure is, they say, tell me about yourself. And you might in an interview talk about all the things you've achieved and what you've done in your life. And you do that to try to make yourself look good, right? You're trying to do that to influence their thinking about you. Managing appearances, we all know what that means. Essentially, you're going to probably shower the day of an interview, put on a nice set of clothes, and yeah, manage your appearance, making sure that you manage the way you look. Integration is a method of impression management that is often seen as manipulative. Integration means to make oneself more likable to the one's target by conforming to the expectations or the opinions of the target. So, um, if they are into, maybe fishing, you see a picture on the desk, you start saying, "Oh yeah, I love fishing, and that's something that, I did when I was a kid." And you try to kind of align your interests or the way you are with them, which gets us into aligning actions and occurs when an individual attempts to present questionable behaviors in a more favorable light. Individuals who are attempting to align actions may laugh off offensive comments as a joke, because they're really trying to align their actions with that individual. And finally, alter casting consists of imposing a different alter identity, um, and corresponding set of expectations than maybe you are, right? It's kind of acting in a way that's completely different than than you are, for sure. People also use altered casting to kind of manipulate the other way people behave. um, you know if you wanted someone to help you with a paper, you might say, "Oh, you're such a great writer. You're always so helpful. Would you mind maybe editing my paper for me? That's a form of alter casting, and you can see how that behavior might be considered manipulative. Okay, so that was a brief overview of chapter 3. A lot of detail in these models, really hard to convey over a quick 20 slide PowerPoint presentation. So I would encourage you to dig deeper into chapter 3 and make sure you understand that material. If you have any questions after you've done that, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask.